You're on the air. 1 minute. Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar of Core MD project, a European project on the importance of research and evidence for medical devices. I think we organized a very nice symposium for you. This is the first in a row. And the Core MD project, just checking, can you see my screen?
Go ahead.
Okay, the symposium will be is organized by the Core MD consortium. We have two interesting speakers. Professor Anna Lübbecke-Wolf. She's a professor in epidemiology at the University of Oxford and Geneva. She's also the founder of. She's also very much interested in involved in the registry of Geneva, and she will talk about clinical evidence for high-risk orthopedic implants, insights from the Core MD project. And we have Mr. Keith Tucker, a former orthopedic surgeon, and being the founder of the Orthopaedic Data Evaluation Panel, a benchmarking tool for orthopedic implants, and also the founder of Beyond Compliance, a way of evaluating implants. So what's the Core MD project? It's an Horizon 2020 granted grant. We have mainly 3 work packages. One is involved in the understanding of methods to generate clinical evidence for high-risk medical devices. And work package 2 is more about the strengthening of the evidence in high-risk medical devices and looking for new methods generating clinical evidence, like artificial intelligence, these things, and machine learning. And the work package 3, we focus more on the extracting of maximum value from medical device registries, which are around in orthopedics and also in cardiology, and look at these real-world evidence data. And then, of course, we have some governance and dissemination work packages, like work package 4. So basically, all these 3 work packages are very much involved in each other. There's a lot of combination between the 3. So the extraction of methods like survival analysis, using prompts, new methods like AI, and the world's data evidence. So you can imagine that all these 3 work very closely together. We have a big consortium of 23 sponsored centers all over Europe. And well, I think we can start. There are some housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded. You can look back at this recorded webinar on the www.core/md.eu. There's a possibility for interaction with us in the Q&A. It's on the bottom on the right top. And we also have 2 small polls just before we start with the webinar and also after the webinar. And if you have some technical problem, please use the chat function in your Zoom link. And again, when you're interested in Core MD, collaboration on research and evidence for medical devices, please subscribe to our newsletter or go to social media. This is our website. And well, I think we will start first with a small poll, which will be launched now, I think. So please use this. How did you learn about the Core MD webinar? Through colleagues, Twitter posts, Core MD website. And the second question is, what is your background? Are you an orthopedic surgeon, cardiologist, other medical specialist, a researcher, industry, or regulator? I think we wait a few seconds and then we will show the results.
Yeah, still people are answering. So 80% of response rate for the moment.
Okay.
still responding. So
okay, then we just have a hunch about the.
okay,
share the results.
yeah, okay. I'm
Okay,
gonna.
great.
There's still some few people responding yet. Okay, let's stop and let's share the results. Can you see the results?
Oh, it's interesting. Colleagues. So it's very important that you interact with your colleagues. It's good in these times of virtual meetings to have at least physical contact with your colleagues. And then what are the participants? That's interesting to see. Few orthopedic surgeons. Interesting. Researchers, regulators, important. Well, thank you. Well, now up to the contents. This was nice. And the first speaker will be Professor Anne Lübbecke-Wolf from Geneva. She will talk about clinical evidence for high-risk orthopedic implants, insights from the CoreMD project. Anna, for you to share the screen.
So good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge also my collaborators, James Smith, Christophe Barria, Amanda Gonzalez, Keith Tucker, and Christophe Commiscure in this project. We focus on devices in this presentation used in elective total hip and total or partial knee arthroplasty. These are among the most frequently performed surgical interventions. 1.7 million hips and 1.7 million knees in OECD countries in 2015. We know that they have a large benefit in terms of pain relief, functional improvement, quality of life over the short and the long term. The objectives of this work are to give an overview of clinical investigations regarding hip and knee implants, in particular the methodologies and clinically relevant outcomes that were reported in the peer-reviewed literature under the current medical device directive. And we looked at availability of clinical investigations assessed prior and subsequent to regulatory approval, meaning CE marking. The second objective of the work was to identify and aggregate all-cause revision rates. That is the main outcome after joint arthroplasty in registry reports and in the peer-reviewed literature. So regarding the first objective, the literature review, we randomly selected 30 hip and knee devices, 10 hip stems, 10 hip cups, and 10 knee systems. And since there is no database on all the implants used in Europe, we approached ODEP, the Orthopaedic Data Evaluation Panel, and randomly selected implants from their database and supplemented the ODEP listing with implants from the registry reports from the European countries. So these were the implants included in the systematic review, and for each device we attempt to identify the year of CE mark, and we performed a systematic search to identify peer-reviewed literature available 10 years before and 20 years after CE marking. The protocol of the search is registered on the Open Science Framework. In total, we screened 2,901 articles. We looked into Embase, PubMed, Web of Science, and after deduplication, we had 2,131 papers. Of those, we included 151 publications, 63 for hip stems, 34 for hip cups, and 54 for the knee systems. Here you can see the implants that were randomly selected. Here the 10 hip stems, the 10 hip cups, and the 10 knee systems. In this column, you see the number of pre-market publications that we found. In fact, it was 0 for all of the 30 implants. Then we found the CE mark here for 28 of the 30 implants. And in the right column, you see the number of post-market publications. So again, prior to CE mark, we found no peer-reviewed publication. And after CE mark, the number of publications ranged from 0 to 19. 8 implants, 26.7% had no publication at all. Here, you can see the results in terms of study characteristics and methodology. So the publication period was from 1995 to 2021. 2/3 of the papers came from Europe. The majority of studies were cohort studies, mostly based coming from single institutions. 12.6% were cohorts based in registries. RCTs were 9.3%, and 44% of the studies had a comparator group. The numbers of prostheses included, the median number was 139. The inclusion period of the patient was on average 3 years. From first patient inclusion to publication, on average, it took 10 years and 9 years from CE mark date to first publication. We also looked at FDA approval. 16 of the 30 implants had FDA approval subsequent, most of the time, to the CE mark, with a few exceptions. And the median time in years between FDA approval and publication was 5 years. Here you can see the median follow-up of the studies was 5 years, ranging from 0, 1 to 18 years. On average, there were quite a lot of studies having a follow-up 5 years and longer. This is due to the fact that in hip and knee arthroplasty, the durability of the implant is important, and the implant stays with the patient, and the longer-term results are crucial. Which types of outcomes were reported? So the most reported outcome was all-cause revision in 75%, 74% of the studies. Patient and then imaging results, mostly based on radiographs, were also reported in 72% of the studies. Patient-reported outcomes in 1/3 of the studies overall, but increasing. Regarding comparative outcome reporting by implants, we looked at how many implants had at least one comparative study reporting on revisions, and we found that was the case for 11 implants, 36.7%. And we found at least one study comparatively reporting on patient-reported patient-reported outcomes. That was the case for 12 implants, so 40%. We also looked at whether a study reported a concern with an implant or a potential concern. This was the case. A potential concern was raised by 7.3% of the publications, a major concern by 5%. Trends in study methodologies were also evaluated, and you can see here that studies using a comparator group and prospective studies were increasing over the period evaluated. This was also the case for patient-reported outcomes, which were not used in between 1995 and 2003 and increased to almost 50% in the last 10 years. There was a slight decrease in imaging reporting in the studies. We also looked at cohort studies that were based in registries versus not based in registries. And you can see here huge differences in terms of sample size. So studies based in registries, which were, by the way, 19 of the studies compared to 108 that were not. So the median number of prostheses was over 3,000 in registry-based studies versus 149 in not registry-based. The median number of revision events were also 102 versus 3. You can see a huge difference regarding methodology. So registry-based cohort studies were mostly prospective, had a comparator group, and had a time to event analysis with reporting of confidence, 95% confidence intervals. However, regarding outcomes, except for because revision studies that were not based in registries reported more often on other complications, on radiographic results, and slightly more often on patient-reported outcomes. I can't move my slides.
Do you want that I share the screen?
Yeah, for some reason it doesn't move on.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
The next one.
Yes, next one. Thank you very much. So the second part of the project was, and this is still ongoing, we looked at all-cause revision rates in registry reports that are publicly available and in the peer-reviewed literature. Again, all-cause revision is the main performance indicator after total hip and knee arthroplasty. Registries are a major source of information in orthopedics. They monitor long-term real-world performance and safety of multiple hip and knee implants simultaneously for a country or region. This is a long-standing activity, and the first national registry started in 1975 in Sweden. They are mostly publicly funded, independent, transparent, use transparent reporting via annual reports, and have a high coverage and completeness of the interventions. Here you can see for the 10 randomly selected hip stems, the cumulative risk of revision as reported in publicly available registry reports. The total number of implants that we included in the analysis was 203,994. The colors indicate the sample sizes of the different registries. So each line is from different registries or from different associations of the stem with another cup. So you can see in terms of colors, it's basically all green, mostly green, superior to 500 or even 1,000 implants per registry. You can also see the long follow-up times and the subsequent data points. So often you see results almost every year. There are a few empty fields also for 3 implants. And this is the corresponding, these are the corresponding findings for each of the 10 hip stems as reported in the peer-reviewed literature. You recognize that the colors are different. So most of the studies have a low sample size in below 100 or 100 to 250. You can also see few data points, some empty ones, and some of them have only just one study reporting the result, all-cause revision. Here, similar results for the knee. The colors are a bit different. We haven't yet done the colored one, but you see a lot of data points for the 10 knee systems, and I can't move it. Again, there seems to be a problem. Could you please show the next slide? Oh, yes, there was the next slide. Yeah, thank you. And again, these are the cumulative risks of revision for each knee system as reported in the peer-reviewed literature. You see the same thing, so very few results reported, very low sample size. In summary, under the new EU MDR, post-market surveillance is expected to be proactive, continuous, and it involves comparison to clinically meaningful comparator group or groups, and the use of clinically relevant endpoints in terms of risks and benefits. We found no pre-CE mark peer-reviewed publication for the 30 implants. For 27% of implants, we found no post-market publication either. This is similar to previous literature who reported the same percentage. We found 9% of studies reporting an RCT. This is also equal to previous literature. The peer-reviewed literature we evaluated was focusing a lot on imaging results, mostly radiographs and RSA. These are recognized surrogates for failure. They also increasingly report patient-reported outcomes. Regarding registries, publications, so studies nested in registries and published as well as annual reports, they report on a very large sample size. They are prospective in general, they are comparative and report long-term outcomes. Both revisions, as a huge focus on revisions from the past, but patients' reported outcomes are also reported increasingly, and more national registries are also collecting patient-reported outcomes. We also found that aggregating results from different annual reports from registries is feasible. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anne, for this nice presentation. For the audience again, if you go to the bottom, there's a Q&A. You can ask questions which will be addressed and discussed with the panel. So please go to the lower bar of your screen and you see a Q&A. Well, you expressed the importance of registries. Of course, you are involved in registries, and you are also the president-elect for ISAR. Of course, you see the value of registries. So, and you also show that only 9% of implants were done in randomized controlled trials. And when you talk to colleagues, they will say the holy grail is, of course, an RCT. So what do you think is, again, the importance of registries? It's not an RCT, it's observational data. But again, I'm also a believer of registries. Could you explain to the audience what your opinion is on this?
I think that there is a place for registries and there's a place for RCTs, and they answer different questions, and they can also used advantageously in combination. So with that, I mean nesting RCTs in randomized trials, I think has already been done. And it is the future, and it has been shown that it is quicker and it's cheaper. It is using an existing infrastructure, and you can use it to randomize patients, and you still have also those who refuse to be randomized. You can see their results as well. I think it's a win-win situation to combine both.
Okay, thank you. So when you look to the future of registries, of course, we're collecting registries. We have registries around since 75. I know you're very much in favor of adding radiographs, I as well, but is that the future, that you have this more, again, different objective data besides revision? Because a revision to some regulators may be a vague endpoint, because when you revise or not revise, it's not like death, like in cardiology. Stent and valve, they have endpoint death, mortality. And that's difficult, of course. In orthopedics, people are not dying. Well, So the addition of radiographs, will it add to the quality of data?
So radiographic outcomes have been used in the orthopedic literature since the beginning since the implants have been introduced, and the use of they are used as a surrogate outcome for later failure due to aseptic loosening. So this is a means to get information on future failure earlier on. Once you have introduced implants, after a few years, you can also see whether radiographically you have changes or not, and this has been related to future failure. So these are surrogate outcomes that have value. They won't replace revision as a sign of durability of the implant, but they would be useful in randomized trials, especially. The point you made is that revision is in a way not a hard point like mortality. So you mean revision, the decision to operate depends not only on the state of the implant, whether it's very used, whether it's loose, the stem or the cup or the knee system is loose. It depends also on the patient's comorbidities and his age, and the so the risk, basically the risk of undergoing a revision surgery, which I agree on that. Yes.
There's a question from Stefan Sauerland. Here he asked, did you examine whether the observational comparative studies paid any attention to confounders and statistical adjustments of results?
Yes, we also recorded whether adjustment or whether methods to deal with confounding were used or not. This was not always the case. I can't give you the exact percentage, but this has not been regularly done. So.
Okay, let's see, there's another one. Oh, okay, yes, there's a question if we can have a certificate for this webinar, something here. Now, another question is, do radiographic endpoints, are they sufficient for assessing quality of life? I think that's rather difficult to answer, I think.
No, they do not assess quality of life. No, it's something different. So no, they won't. So patient-reported outcomes are very important. Patient-reported outcomes, the advantage of them in this context is that you do not need that many patients to be able to compare two groups in terms of patient-reported outcomes. It's not like the revision outcome where you need often thousands of patients to find a clinically meaningful and statistically significant difference. So patient-reported outcomes should be done in addition to, if you use surrogate measures, patient-reported outcomes, you should do them also from the start, and you can evaluate them already early on.
Yeah. There's one last question, well, there are more questions, but I think one especially addressed to you. Could you reflect on the difference in outcome of registry-based cohorts versus none? And why well, forms has been answered. What's the difference, you think? The difference in outcome of registry-based cohorts versus no registry-based cohorts. I think that's a number. It's, I think, an obvious answer, I would say.
I'm not sure I understood the question. So if they give, was the question whether registry-based studies give a different result than?
Oh, no, in general, the difference in outcome of registry-based, I think it's, well, it's 100,000 versus 200, and that's what's very nicely shown by you in your graph.
Yeah.
And for the participants, yes.
So the main point to look at is the number of events. Obviously, if you have only on the median number of events in the published literature was 3, so it's very difficult to make any conclusions with so few events. So in registry-based studies, the median number of events was 102, which allows you to already to adjust for baseline differences and or stratify if necessary, so to make statistically meaningful conclusions.
Yeah, thank you. I think we move on, and for the participants who logged in later on, there will be a recording of this webinar, and it's available at the website of CoreMD. Next speaker will be Mr. Keith Tucker. He was an orthopedic surgeon. Well, he still is an orthopedic surgeon, but he's not active as an orthopedic surgeon. He's the founder of the Orthopaedic Data Evaluation Panel, evaluating different implants, and also the Beyond Compliance initiative, which also is based in the UK. ODEP is used all over the place, all over the world. And Keith, well, for you the floor.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
And can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we're good to go. Well, thank you for inviting me to let's get this right. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this symposium webinar. So you've asked me to speak about improving the safety of legacy and new implants in today's Europe, the experience we have with ODEP and Beyond Compliance. Here's my declaration of interests. Okay, I'd like to start with ODEP for legacy products. So ODEP was set up in 2002 after we had a major problem in this country with what was called a 3M capital hip. It was a Charnley lookalike. It was much cheaper. It was so-called a minor change from the Charnley, but it wasn't a minor change in terms of patient the effect on patients. It was pretty disastrous. We realized back in those days that there was no obligation for manufacturers to check on the effectiveness of their joint replacement. They put them in the market, and that was that. There was nobody checking. So we were set up at the same time as the National Joint Registry. And our philosophy has been to work with manufacturers to assess the performance of their products, to inform surgeons, patients, and hospitals about the performance of individual implants, obviously to reduce the number of revisions, and also, importantly, to promote good implants. And we do it by the use of using benchmarks. Just hold in a minute. I'm just getting a bit stuck with the tab blocking my slides. Okay, well, I'll manage. So what do we mean by a benchmark? Well, it's an agreed standard against which all implants of the same type are judged at a certain time point, and it's based on the non-inferiority concept. So to obtain a benchmark, a manufacturer has to look at their data. And ODEP, we ensure they look, which was our prime, and the thing we've really always wanted to do is to make sure manufacturers actually know what's going on with their products. And it's not just their revision rates, but also why. Why have they had a revision? So we started in 2003 with hips. Knees came along quite a bit later. In 2015, the Netherlands joined. That was great. We've done shoulders, unicondylar knees, elbows, spines, and this year we've just started with wrists. It's not a competition, ODEP. It's voluntary. But however, selling implants without an ODEP rating in our country is really very difficult, and they're relied on very heavily by procurement in this country, and I think in others as well. We seem to be pretty popular around the world. We did analysis of the hits we get on our website, and the blue is where we get the hits, and the darker the blue, the more the hits. So who are we? Well, within the ODEP outfit, there are about 50 of us working. mostly senior orthopedic surgeons who are very experienced with joint replacement. Many of us have actually been involved in the design of a joint replacement, and we have experts in procurement. We have a couple of retired employees for implant manufacturers who give us a lot of insight into how manufacturers work. We have statisticians, and we have IT specialists and technologists, and everybody gives their time without financial reward. But we do have our expenses paid by SCCL, which is essentially a government organization through the NHS. We're massively supported by NEC, that's the organization that provide the support for the National Joint Registries. And our services are actually free to manufacturers. And so therefore, all round, we think we have no conflicts. So how does it work? Well, manufacturers submit data to support the continuing use of their product on the bespoke submission form. They collect the data. They send it to us, we look at it, and we award benchmarks, or we don't if they fail, on the basis of the submission. And the number represents the years of use and the letter of the strength of the evidence. So we've got pre-entry, we've got benchmarks at 3, 5, 7, 10, 13, and 15. And once they're in the system, they've got to keep moving. You can't just stay at 3 and because you fancy staying there and you haven't got any more data or the data's poor. You've got to move on to 5, then you've got to move on to 7, and then you've got to move on to 10. You've got to keep moving. And if you don't keep moving, then you're marked as lapsed and you no longer have an ODEP benchmark. So this is the grid for hips that we look at when we're doing this, reviewing the submissions, and manufacturers work from. You'll see at the top, there's the criteria for A ratings, and you will see the number of centers outside the developing center. There's got to be at least 3. There's got to be at least 3 surgeons outside the developer. There's got to be a certain number of patients in the cohort. And you'll see for a 15A star on the right-hand side, there's got to be 500 patients in the cohort. And 400 of them have got to be past the benchmark time at 15A, 15 years, to achieve a 15A star. And below that, you'll see the maximum revision rate that's acceptable. And for a 15A star rating, you've got to have less than 8% revision at 15 years. And you'll see that at 3 years, it's 3%. The A ratings below there you'll see that the main difference is the number that actually reached the benchmark time. Whereas for an A star, it's 400. For an A, it's 40. So there's less confidence in the data. Therefore, the revision rate, the upper confidence level is higher. An A rating is not as strong as an A star rating for hips. The B ratings, B does not stand for bad, it stands for boutique, or where, such as a CDH prosthesis, or where a manufacturer has decided to introduce a new implant very slowly, just through one center. And it's actually the lower confidence interval that we look at for the benchmark. That was for hips. We've now got knees. You'll see that at the beginning there, it's quite interesting. You'll see that we accept a 3.5 upper limit for the revision rate for 3A. That's in the light blue column at the bottom there against maximum revision rate, whereas for hips it was 3. But at 15 years, whereas for hips it was 8, it's 6.5 for knees. And this reflects, as I'll show you later, the data that's around to form these benchmarks. Hips do less well at 15 years than knees, but knees don't do quite so well at the beginning. And the rest of it is pretty much the same as you saw for hips. The numbers are slightly different, but the concept's the same. Shoulders are a little different, and because basically there aren't nearly as many shoulder operations done or shoulder replacements done as the hips and knees. There aren't the numbers, so we've got to actually adjust to that to make any sense of the business. And also for an A star rating, we need to have PROMs. submitted by the manufacturer. But otherwise, conceptually, it's roughly the same. And that's spine is very similar, but you'll see that I've boxed it up there. A percentage of patients who've undergone adjacent segment surgery. We do adjust the whole thing to each joint. And you may or may not know that if you had a cervical disc replacement, that's what this is about. The whole idea of having it is so that the levels above and below don't suffer. So if you have to have surgery at the level above or below the disc replacement, it really hasn't done as well as it ought, and therefore that loads the rating. So data sources, well, nowadays it's registry data. When we started, it was RCTs and peer-reviewed publications and podium presentations. And we do accept in-house data. We do want manufacturers to produce data. And we do benchmark implants from all around the world, even though they are not necessarily used in the UK. And these are the registries which manufacturers have successfully used last year. National Joint Registry from our UK, REPO, that's Italy, Australian Registry, New Zealand, the Netherlands Registry, Norway and Finland, SHAR and SCAR, CIRRUS, EPRD, Slovakian Registry, AJRR, and so on. And they are they're all basically registries where we're pretty confident that the relationship between primary and revision is strong. So Alan asked me a while ago, how do we come to the benchmarks? Well, originally they were prescribed by NICE, and it was on the basis of any data that was available in 2002. And I can tell you there was very little. But also the granny test, we thought, what was a reasonable revision rate for an implant to be offered to a member of, well, a family member, the granny. More recently, we look at registry data on a regular basis, and we actually ratchet up. We review all our benchmarks on a pretty regular basis, and tighten them up as time goes by, because there's been a lot of improvement in the results of joint replacements since ODEP started 20 years ago. So what's on the submission form? Well, submission forms are going to be available to you all, and take a look at them, and you can see it's pretty comprehensive. We think we're unique because we're a clinical evaluation, which fits with the MDR. And as I was saying early on, why is important. We need to know why revisions occur: infection, aseptic loosening, dislocation, implant failure, and so on. And it's important that manufacturers know why their implants have failed. It's unique, I think, in that we base our ratings on brands and also on the product codes within the brands, and that's pretty important. And so that manufacturers have got to declare all their product codes within a brand, because camouflage is a big worry. And I think we're all recognizing it a lot more than we did a few years ago, because big data can camouflage a variant whose performance does not match the rest of the brand. And it's often a very small number of this smaller group, and which doesn't stand up to statistical analysis. You just got to be jolly well aware. And we've had some experience with camouflage, which has sometimes been very pretty unpleasant, really. I can say that about the next gen high flex gender specific option tibia is one we've been dealing with recently, because it's been in all the national papers. So I think it's only reasonable that I declare it on this slide. We did miss stemmed metal on metal because it was camouflaged by other bearing combinations. I think for a while we missed that females were doing less well with surface replacement than males, because the overall surface replacement figures were okay, but it was the women who weren't doing well, and we needed to sort them out, and NJR did that. Yes, no patella with Journey 2 BCS oxinium nose, they did badly. And we had some problems with cobalt chrome against stainless steel hip stems and so on. And as I say, it's ODEP is unique. It is a clinical evaluation, but also we're involving PROMs increasingly, although it's challenging. I mean, no, we all realize most total hips and total knees are doing jolly well, but we really love to know that they're satisfying the patients. And also perhaps separating between the very good and the good. And some implants don't lead to the revision when they go badly wrong, and particularly shoulders. Sometimes you just can't do anything, so it's left there. So the arm is just a paperweight. Well, that doesn't come back as a revision. But of course, with PROMs, you're going to find out. And PROMs, we remind us all, are required for the MDR. And speaking about the MDR, we do our submissions rely on clinical data for their completion. Therefore, ODEP data satisfies most of the requirements for the clinical investigation for the MDR for legacy devices. So our maxim is copy and paste wherever possible. Over the years, we've been pretty busy. I think we've done well over 1,000 hips for 1,000 submissions for hips. Yeah, I think that over the years, we've noticed quite a few implants have gone off the market shortly before they've come for their next ODEP session. So that's legacy products. And now move on to new products where we didn't do well. You could say that, perhaps it's been a bit unfair on ourselves, but where we didn't do terribly well. You know, you all remember this, ASR and stem metal on metal doing extremely badly compared with the average hip replacement. And we weren't, particularly that one, we didn't pick it up early enough between the CE mark and the ODEP 3A rating. CE is compliance. Perhaps I'm being a bit cheeky when I say that it's just a badge of hopeful expectation. After all, the people who give them out expecting these implants to work well. But we all must agree that proof is time dependent. And so the CE mark is compliance, but we've thought, well, this just isn't enough. We'd had this experience with metal on metal particularly. And so out of frustration, we thought it was about time we went beyond compliance, in vigilance, in diligence. It is voluntary, it's independent, and it's run through our registry, but we've been looking for other registries to work with us. It is a service evaluation. It's not an audit, it's not research. And it's linked with ODEP and with the National Joint Registry. So here's a picture of the sort of schema of how it works. For surgeons in this country, there's nothing different as far as they're concerned for loading up after a joint replacement. The difference is that the NGR mainframe recognizes the product code and copies that data and puts it into a repository, which becomes richer and richer with data coming in from the other side. You can see death, PROMs, X-rays, revisions, so on and so forth. And we can export, we do export data from that repository to the manufacturers, to the rapporteurs. They're the people who have been overseeing this particular implant, and to the surgeons. So how does BC work? Well, we do a risk assessment of an implant, and that's an interesting and important start. Then the data is collected, as I say, through the National Joint Registry, and then we do reviews and user group meetings. The reviews are about every 6 months or so with a new product, and they're usually done online with a champion surgeon, the manufacturer, our contractor, and the guys in our group that have been looking after that particular product. And then we do user group meetings, and I think these should be done more and more with other implants. There we get the champion surgeon, the manufacturer, and so on and so forth. But importantly, as many of the surgeons who are using this new implant as possible, because sometimes you just get a feeling that something isn't quite right with an instrument or something like that. And we've found these user group meetings really helpful to the manufacturer and to ourselves. And this is the sort of report that they get in advance of these meetings. is pretty detailed. I'm only going to show you little bits of it for time, but they get basic data, demographics, and so on and so forth. They're going to get reasons for revision, and they're also going to get the graph of the performance of the surgeons using that prosthesis. So if one of those dots is outside the plot, we know that there's one surgeon that's actually finding it difficult and perhaps messing up the results. Yes, we pick up interoperative adverse events. We want to know, does this prosthesis, is it possible to put it in, or does the patellar tendon avulse every time you do it? And we're looking for PROMs, because there we think we can pick up stuff in advance of revision. And when a problem is detected, and we've picked up some problems, and the first thing, we go to the manufacturer. But I have to say, so far, with everything we've picked up, the manufacturers always want to blame the surgeons. And then the statisticians say, well, you can't call it as an outlier because the numbers are too small. But, you know, it's sort of slightly rude, this comment, but if there's a smell, you should follow your nose and chase down, go to the surgeons, phone them up, find out what's going on, and drill down into it before more patients are damaged. Yes, we've had a few successes, we think. We identified one implant that had an unacceptable design. They actually agreed that during the meeting. We had one hospital which was getting some bad infections. One potential with a base plate, which wasn't doing as well as the manufacturer liked, a tibial base plate, and they've redesigned it. There was one surgeon who was definitely messing up the results of a particular implant. And then, as I'll show you in a minute, there was one where the implant was doing well, provided the patella was resurfaced. And here's the graphs. There on the left there is the survivorship of an unresurfaced. This is the Journey 2 BHS Oxynium. And there it is, the survivorship unresurfaced and survivorship when it's resurfaced. And because of this, the manufacturer wrote to all the users, told them to resurface the patella, and the results are now doing pretty well. So we've been quite busy over the years, much less busy since the MDR and COVID and Brexit and everything else. But we've done quite a few of these beyond compliance. Now, how does that fit with the MDR? And the beyond compliance, as I've just been really telling you, this is our current service. We come in after the CE mark comes in, and we observe the implant with the manufacturer and with it, so on, until it gets usually they stop being in beyond compliance when they get an ODET 3A rating. And most of these implants that we've looked at so far have got their CE mark on the basis of equivalence. Now, here is as I see it, the post-MDR situation. It's different. You start on the left-hand side there, and the manufacturer's got the design, so on and so forth, trial design, ethics approver, consent. Then they go to a competent authority and say, can we put them in? They say yes. And so the first implant goes in. And now that, where it says clinical investigation, the only people that are officially looking there, as far as we know, is the principal investigator and the manufacturer. And there's no outside observation. That's the same situation we had between the CE mark and ODET 3A when we introduced beyond compliance in 2012. Because on this thing, we only come in when it's got the CE mark. And before then, it's not been externally validated. And what we think should be the case, we recommend strongly, and we've had support from MHRA, BSI, TÜV, and quite a few other people, that this should be the situation, that in fact, external validation of a new implant should start right at the very beginning And this will, for a good implant, this is going to increase the confidence of the manufacturer enormously. And also in terms of selling, people will say, yeah, well, who looked at the data before you put it, before you got your CE mark? And if you say, well, it's been externally validated, that's got to be good. If it's not externally validated, I don't think a lot of people will use it, frankly. But that's a personal view. But anyhow, we think that's a solution, not necessarily for us, but for somebody who wants to develop this sort of system. So our aims with regard to the MDR is that we want to collect essentially much of the same data that manufacturers have to be collecting for the MDR, both for new and legacy devices. Maybe we'll want a bit more data, but we expect to nest the MDR data requirements in ODET and BC. And our slogan, as I was saying earlier, is to be copy and paste, make life easy for everybody. So my take-home message today is ODEP has been working in this field for 21 years. We've been in beyond compliance for 10 years. We've evolved, and we're always looking to improve our services. We work with manufacturers, and we want to work closely with the development of the MDR and the UKCA. Now, just something, as I've got an audience, I just wanted to advertise this. So thanks for listening to that. But just one of these little quick advert. We're running the first international meeting of spinal registries at the RNOH on the 23rd of March this year, fairly soon, and you're all welcome. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. And I pass it back to you, Rob.
Okay. Well, thank you, Keith. Very interesting lecture again. I answered some of the cues. One, I think, is both for Anne and you, Keith. Martin Pickford. Why do so few surgeons look at which products are giving the best registry results, but insist on using something new and untested? I think that's for the three of us to answer. Keith, you can start.
Well, there's 2 or 3 ways of looking at this, aren't there? There's, first of all, you know, are we just going to say the joint replacements we have now are fine? There's no need to do anything better. It's absolutely fine. And do nothing else in terms of research. Well, I don't think they are completely right, are they? It would be lovely. We're now doing these joint. The youngest joint replacement, knee hip replacement I did was in a 14-year-old. Now, you know, it's going to have to last a hell of a long time. And so I think there is always this, everybody's wanting to do something better. But as I think Martin is saying, the enemy of good is better. And so there is that side of the argument. Then there's the other side of the argument, which is to say, look, don't start fiddling around, because the track record of things which have been new has not been good. And there is a certain type of surgeon who does seem to want to do something new. Maybe it's advertising, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some bad reasons, maybe there's some good reasons, but I don't think it's simple. I don't think you will ever stop manufacturers, well, Homo sapiens, from trying to improve, but there may be some dangers in the way, which is why I think you must monitor anything new, and you must have it externally validated. Yeah,
so I think we can guide them. And what do you think on this holistic question?
First of all, I agree with what Keith said, and there's not much to add to this, but I think it's also, we have to keep in mind that the results for total hips and total knees are already very good. So it's difficult to improve something that is already very good. And the risk of not improving it is probably higher for something which has a low satisfaction and low which starts at a lower level of performance. So be aware that the implants that are out there have very good long-term results, and patients are very happy with most of them. So
Keith, what do you think? We have the MDR. Of course, there will be a Brexit soon, I understand. How can the MDR and actually registries and also ODEP can be part of this post-marketed surveillance. And Keith, what is your opinion on this? What are the minimum requirements to have this? Because industry, it's mandatory to have post-marketed surveillance, but not all industry are doing this with their products. So why not use registries? And what would be the minimum requirements, you think? And
first of all, I look forward to seeing the information in UDAMED. So having open, transparent reporting on the results that are out there from publications, from registries and other sources prior and post market for each implant will be a big step ahead. So this will help to get a better idea of what the information basis was on which the decisions were made, and then it will be easier to improve on that. But of course there should be studies. So we saw that also from previous studies, between 25 and 30% of the implants had no peer-reviewed publications at all. This has been found in the UK, in Norway, in Italy, and in Spain, and we also found this. So this is certainly an area of improvement. And then, as Keith said, somebody needs to look at what is out there early on, not only after 5 years or not only from the publication, so systematically and already at 1 year, 2 years, and so on. And we showed that you can aggregate data from registry reports. And so then if you have a few implants in one country and a few implants in the second and a few in the third, you can combine the results on an aggregate analysis level. One of the things we need to work on is the number of implants, or we need to know the number of implants in annual reports that come to be reported is not n equals 1. So every national registry has another rule to say, okay, we start, some registries report starting from 400 cases, others start reporting only if there are 1,000 or 2,000 cases of a specific implant, and others report already from 50 cases on. So this is, for new implants, it's important to get already the information when there are only a few hundred or few cases reported. So that is another form of camouflage in a way if these are not reported publicly in smaller numbers.
Do you think it's also a necessity that we need then also that should be mandatory for registries to have their barcode in, or the UDI even, unique device identification? Because that is also a problem with the registries. Some have only a pull down list of names, while there may be different types of certain types around. That's what Keith Tucker also described in the past with the camouflage. You have a certain name, but of the name there's 8 or different subtypes which are not reported in the registry but are reported in ODEP. Keith, what is your
Yeah, thanks. Well, NextGen's got 74 different variants.
Yeah.
You know, and some of the triathlon I think is 40 something. I mean, there's massive variation, and we need to be looking at them all. A couple of points. I was listening to Anne, who made a super comments, and can't quite remember what the question was, but the couple of things I wanted to pick up on. Some manufacturers work in countries where there isn't a registry. India particularly, but they do actually market their stuff outside India. So I think that internationally we do have to sometimes accept, well, they may have a registry, but it's not one which we could rely on. So that's one thing. I think in terms of the MD, in terms of papers, Anne was just saying, look, you know, there aren't papers to go back on to look at the results of a particular, you know, the Rob Nellison hip replacement. Well, there's a reason for that. Most journals won't take a study which has got less than 10-year follow-up. Those are the peer-reviewed journals. Unless there's disaster. I mean, I was involved with the Hip Society, as you probably know, for a long time, we would publish at a 3-year follow-up if it was bad, but it had to be at least 10 years. We wouldn't let them get anywhere near the podium unless it was 10 years. Now with IT and all the devices we have these days, and eFort and so on and so forth, you know, perhaps there's time when we could get single studies to get into the public domain, even though it's just on an electronic thing, because then we could actually see, people could write up the results of the Rob Nellison hip replacement or something. But at the moment, it's very difficult to do something, a study of a joint replacement and get it published inside 10 years, unless it's going bad. And I think that's a fundamental reason why it's so important at the moment, until something changes, that we use registries. But the registries we use have got to have completeness, they've got to have compliance, they've got to have linkability.
Yeah. So that's an important
really for the MDR, we should, the MDR, people say, well, the MDR and ODEP and the rest of it really ought to be the same, because they should be the MDR people should be asking the best questions, and we should be asking the best questions. So they're going to be the same questions.
So that's it. So we need at least perhaps 95% completeness and coverage of those implants in a registry. So when people want to have an early evaluation of safety and concerns, like the benefit-risk ratio we just mentioned in the MDR, although there are of course methods around, of course I'm biased in that respect, like implant migration studies, either with RSA or perhaps a new technique with CT. They are kind of predictive for 10-year follow-up, of course. So What's the place of these things? Should it be mandatory to have these implant migration studies and also have the registries? So both, like in a phased introduction of new implants, like in pharma, at least then we have a safe product for our patients. Is that a way to go? Anne, or first Anne?
Yes, so there is the ideal collaboration that, or the ideal framework for introduction of, also for surgery in general and for introduction of new implants, and they recommend registering the implant in a registry from first in man use on. And then I think, but that comes then to the question: when when are the results, at which N do we make them publicly available in annual reports, or do we want the manufacturers or the people who need the data to contact the registries for reports? It is certainly easier to have as much for all the different stakeholders that are interested in the results, including also obviously regulators, notified bodies, health technology assessment people, and other researchers. If we have most of the information and very early on in the annual reports from the registries, including improved implant identification, as you mentioned, Rob, with the UDI. We already have in most registries a harmonized outcome assessment in terms of revision rates, and we have a very good linkage between primary and revision. We should also add patient-reported outcomes, which, as I said, is now done in a quite large number of national registries, and the OECD is also publishing now regularly on the results of patient-reported outcomes 1 year after surgery from different national registries. We don't have yet that much of the reporting of FROMs per implant, but in order to fulfill what you said, the requirements to report on benefit and risks, this is something that should be added. And I also think for new implants, RSA and radiographic evaluation in a smaller number of implants in the beginning for specific questions or for specific changes would be very useful.
Yeah. Keith, we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah, I got two comments. First of all, I think we really do need to improve on PROMs. And I think we need to maybe redesign PROMs. But what we've got with Beyond Compliance is an app. That means the patient enters their PROMs data on an app, and we have it in real time all the time. And I think if we can get that going for all new implants, that's got to be good. It's going to be much better than paper and so on and so forth. An app is absolutely essential. The second thing is that, you know, I mean, what I'm sure you were trying to say, Rob, because I know you well, was that, you know, RSA needs to be involved in every implant. I couldn't agree more. But also, you know, that I'm playing around with AI these days, and we're hoping very much that with machine learning, we can actually tell the difference between a post-op film and one a year later. And following your, you know, your teaching, if those two X-rays are the same, we don't need to worry for taking an X-ray for 10 years. But if we can make something simpler than RSA, like with machine learning, and so far with our study, it's looking pretty good, but I'm not going to claim anything at this point in time, hopefully in a year or two's time. But that ought to be the way to go. So patient apps for PROMs and maybe a way around RSA, but the same sort of thing as RSA, then I think we'll be in a better place. Yeah,
thank you. One last comment. I think it's always, of course, for non-surgeons, PROMs are very important. Of course, the PROMs, the patient-reported outcome measures, are more like a perception of what they think of that surgery, but it's very important. But how about, because we also know that it's not only one hip, one knee, one shoulder. So a patient may have suffering from one knee, and filling in the PROMs after 1 year, he may suffer from another hip. So the PROMs will be influenced by the perception of pain of that other knee or hip on the contour on the other side. So do we need PROMs for only the first year? Because there will be a lot of bias, I think, when we have PROMs for 2 years, 3 years, etc. So what's your opinion? It's the last one short answer each, because we have 4 minutes left.
That's why you've got to have an app, because you can keep on doing it for year after year. And also the app is designed to correct. So it does actually say, you know, you are talking about the joint that we're interested in, not the rest of your body.
Yeah. And Anne?
Yeah, I think what is very important in PROMs collection is the same as for revision collection. You have to know the population from which you collect the PROMs. You can't just invite some people where you don't know where the pool of the patient is to fill out an app. So you have to know the whole population that is exposed to the implant, and then you need to know how many responded. So not everybody's always responding. So response rates are very important. You have to know information, obviously baseline and others, but it is not enough to just get 50 or 150 responses from somewhere, and you don't know who is your source population of that. So there are always these rules again. So you have to base it. It's either regional based or hospital based or national based, or you need this kind of.
Absolutely agree. But I think until we start collecting it, then we won't be able to play the games to evaluate it. I think that's the thing.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Anne and Keith. We have a final poll for the participants. So again, go out to our website, coremd.eu, European Union.eu. You will find the recording of this and also some extra information. And now the final poll: do you think there's a value using registries? Well, I think we'll see what people answer. The second question is, do you think there is a value in using ODAP rating in your practice? And if you would like to answer this, and again, thank you for participating in this webinar. And well, go to our website, put questions, and then we can answer them with our CoreMD consortium. And enjoy your evening. Let's see, we just see the results. Still have some, 115 participants.
Replies that are coming. So let's wait a few seconds.
See if you convince them.
It's like waiting for exam results.
I think so.
Okay, let's share.
Oh, well, okay, that's good. There are a few. Okay, that's nice. Okay. Well, thank you again. Enjoy your evening. And Keith and Anne, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and discussion. during the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.